All right, welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm pretty sure it's evening for some of you. Thank you for joining the session. Really excited to have these great speakers, distinguished panelists, if you will, and also all of you for coming to the session. And if you have to take off early or whatnot later, that's all good. We got it recorded, and we'll be diving right into this conversation with new academic library leaders, or rather in new institutions. And so they will be giving introductions of themselves, and we're going to do a little Q&A with them, some already prompted questions. And then from there, we'll open the floor to any participants. You can type in the chat, and I will be moderating the session. So I am Ray Pun at Fresno State as the first-year Student Success Librarian, and I am the convener of the ACRL Leadership Discussion Group. And if you didn't know, the ACRL Leadership Discussion Group is under a discussion group within ACRL, and it is pretty much free. If you are a ACRL member, you can join. It's something that we are really excited to get people discussing about leadership opportunities and learning from each other and so forth. So I encourage everyone to look at past webinars we've had. We've had speakers from Jessica Clemens, who talked about innovation, to Mary Lee Kennedy to talk about strategic thinking and so forth. So without further ado, we're going to jump right into the introductions. So if the panelists can just introduce themselves.
Hi, hi everyone. I'm going to keep the intro short so we can get to the questions, and particularly your questions. I'm Trevor Dawes, the Vice Provost for Libraries and Museums and Mae Morris University Librarian at the University of Delaware. I love saying that title. Here I have responsibility for the libraries, the university museums, and the university press. I've been in this role since July of 2016. Previously, I was an associate university librarian at Washington University and had some previous roles at Princeton and Columbia universities in New Jersey and New York, respectively. I'll stop there, and we'll get to the questions soon.
Can you hear me okay? This is Maggie Farrell at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. I have been in this role as Dean of Libraries since August of 2017, so just about 6 months. I served for 2 years as Dean of Libraries at Clemson University in South Carolina, and then for 13 years as Dean of Libraries at the University of Wyoming. So it's great to be with you today, and thank you in advance for your questions and stimulating the conversation about library leadership.
Good morning from sunny Fresno State. I'm Dale Hornbuckle, and I am Dean of Library Services here at Fresno State, and I've been in my role since September 2017. And previously, I was director of the Brennan Library at LaSalle College in Newton, Massachusetts, and I was in that role for about 3.5 years. And before that, I don't know how far back, I won't take too much time here. I was the campus library manager at the Brockville campus of Montgomery College, which is a 3-campus community college system in Maryland. Brockville is the largest. And before that, I was the assistant director of information services at the Baker Library in the Harvard Business School for about 6 years. So I'm glad to be here and certainly thrilled to be part of the Fresno State community.
Thanks, everyone. We're going to jump into the first question here. As a library director, how do you keep up with the trends in academic and research librarianship? Trevor, would you like to start off?
Sure. So, this is probably this is the easiest of the questions. That's probably why you had this one first. Keeping up with trends for me is really easy because I think over time I have built a really strong network of colleagues throughout the profession, and that's really one of the ways, perhaps the the way in which I most keep up with what's happening. I can reach out to folks via phone call or email, or, we're part of discussion groups, or we're part of Facebook groups. But, I read a fair amount of the library literature, obviously, American Libraries, Library Journal. It's also, for me, important to read about what's happening in higher ed. So things like the Chronicle Inside Higher Education, the Journal of Blacks in Higher, JBHE, Journal of Blacks in Higher Education, and other publications that really help me to think about not only what's happening in the libraries, or academic libraries in particular, but also what's happening in higher education, because that's where we really need to make those connections. So it's a combination of, I'll say, social media, and I'll include things like email listservs in that, and Facebook and Twitter, and then the networks and literature. And I'm happy to, if anyone is interested in the titles of the things that I just mentioned, or other things that I read on a regular basis, I'm happy to provide those.
Thank you, Trevor.
Sorry.
Del, would you like to go?
So just like Trevor, I keep up with the professional development networks, attending conferences, and just my network of colleagues that I've gathered over the years. I've had a subscription to college and research libraries for years. I really like that publication. I read the table of contents when the publications come out, the Journal of Librarianship and Information Science, the Journal of Academic Librarianship I also like. But I like to also, as Trevor stated, stay on top of what's happening in the world of academia and higher education. So I read the Chronicle of Higher Ed, New Horizons, which is a publication from EDUCAUSE, and Inside Higher Education. I really like their blogs. But I learn a great deal from the many LIS listservs that I'm a part of. I get to pay a lot of attention also from, I think, the plethora of webinars and workshops that come through our email. It definitely speaks to a lot of the trends. And I also just in this role, and I've learned just kind of since I've been on a management leadership track, I think it's important to read material on leadership, change management, and organizational development. So that's a lot of my lifetime reading.
So this is Maggie, and I follow Trevor and Del's lead in terms of creating a network of colleagues, reading library literature. But I do want to stress what Del has pointed out, and that is leadership and higher education materials, because the way that we can be most effective in our positions is understanding the broad community that we serve. And as an academic librarian, we're serving higher education. So I need to connect strongly with our trustees, with the president and provost of the university, in understanding the environment and the pressures that they are dealing with. Enables me to be more effective as a leader, to keep up with the trends that they are watching, and then hopefully to lead and influence the library in such a way that we are addressing the needs of our university beyond just library needs, but really addressing some of the critical issues that higher education is facing. So having that broad diversity of reading materials and activities that go beyond librarianship is critical, I believe, to the success of a library leader.
Thank you all. These questions came from other members, so it's sort of preemptive questions. And I think the person who asked was really curious, because there's like a flow of information, like we're being inundated. There's just so many things to stay on top of. And I think it's also important, as you all mentioned, just looking almost at the pressure points of higher education and what are the trends holistically. So moving on to the second question, you all have been library directors in other institutions before. What advice can you give to those who are brand new directors or will be directors for the first time? Del, would you like to start first?
Sure. I would suggest get a mentor, and if at all possible, at the administrative level. Also, get a few trustworthy colleagues outside of the library, willing to serve sort of as your kitchen cabinet. At that level, you're now at the top of your org chart, and you're making a lot of decisions alone sometimes. So it's always good to process and talk through issues before acting. Sometimes you always get good feedback. Almost memorize the colleges or the library's strategic plan right away, because that'll be your guiding light. It's just important to be on top of that. I'd also add that I found it really beneficial to get involved as soon as you're on board and kind of get settled in a high-impact practice initiative on campus, not only for exposure and making connections, but also I think to establish a working relationship at the university-wide level on a large-scale strategic initiative at your campus.
This is Maggie. I think I'm supposed to go next, so I'll just pop in here. I would recommend for new directors just to breathe. And I know that sounds a little silly, but I think as new directors, often we want to get to work right away and solve a variety of problems. And what we probably need to do as a new director or new dean is to listen, take that precious time that you have as a new leader to try to understand the organization, the culture, and to get to know individuals within the organization. I think during any transition, individuals within the library are going through this transition and are struggling. Even when they're happy and they're excited about the transition, it still is change. So for a new library director, understanding that individuals are processing a lot of information and new information and giving them the space to manage that transition well. I do think you take advantage of being new to articulate your vision, to set the tone for your leadership and how you expect individuals to work with each other and to communicate. And you set forth that vision and you address immediate issues, but take the time that you need to understand the organization. And if you do so, then I think you'll be able to move forward in a more deliberate fashion that addresses the goals of the organization, both the libraries and the university or college.
Thank you.
So, unlike Dell and Maggie, this is my first time being a library director. I was an associate university librarian previously. But I do agree with what both Dell and Maggie have said. One of the pieces of advice that I got, which I found to be very helpful, was to use, Dell mentioned the kitchen cabinet. One of the pieces of advice that I got was to use the members of the search committee as that kitchen cabinet. Right, these are the people who wanted you to come to the library to begin with, and so I think they are invested in your success. And so I have certainly reached out to and continue to be in touch with many of the members who served on the search committee that brought me here to the University of Delaware. They've been really good sounding boards for things. As Del also mentioned, you're also in this role, in other roles, and even as an AUL, I found it a lot easier to communicate in a more relaxed way with my colleagues within the library. In this role, and this is not about holding information back, because I share, I think, I perhaps overshare sometimes, but I think the ways in which you have communications with the staff that you work with, you just need to be a little careful about that, right? Whenever I ask a question, sometimes it may seem as though I'm giving a directive. And so I have to be very careful in saying, I'm just asking a question. This is not giving you a directive. So it's, and that may be a part of understanding the culture of the organization that was in place before you got there. Get to know the staff, both in the library and get to know the people across the campus. You know, Del also talked about getting involved in projects and campus-wide projects. I spent, I don't know, the first few months, you know, having one-on-one meetings with every member of the staff in the library. I believe it's important for me to know the people that I work with. And I spent a lot of time, you know, meeting administrators, faculty, department heads, department chairs. So at faculty meetings, department meetings, and the people at one of the restaurants in town got to know me very well because I was having lunch there at least once a week, twice a week, you know, with different people. I agree also with Maggie about setting expectations and articulating your vision. It's very important for everyone to understand, you know, sort of who you are and how you expect to work with everyone in the organization, so that you know there are no surprises. I don't believe in surprises. So those are perhaps the 3 or 4 things that I would recommend.
Thank you all. Does anyone have other comments you want to make before we move on? Okay. So I am just speaking again. Hopefully you can hear me for those participants who said they had issues. We are moving to question number 3. How do you address, plan, or visualize addressing the disconnect between libraries and staff and the students they serve? So I'm going to paraphrase this question from someone else. Between, you could say, in your perspective, possibly the libraries and librarians and support staff, or libraries and the campus partners. So any response you would like. How about we start with Maggie and then Trevor? Thanks.
Thank you, Ray. And there are so many ways that we could discuss issues in this question. So I am going to focus on disconnect between libraries and the students that we serve. So a challenge that I have before me at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas is that we have been named the most diverse campus in the United States. So our students are reflecting a very diverse population, and it is one factor that attracted me to this position. The disconnect is that the university, faculty, administrators, and staff, including library faculty and staff, do not reflect the diversity that we have for our students. So it is a top priority for me. I know that is a shared value within ACRL and ALA. So that is probably my number one issue that I have at UNLV, but I know it's also an issue that we have within our profession. And looking for ways and answers to really address this disconnect. The other disconnect that I think we constantly need to watch for is how students work, how students behave, their expectations, the pressures, which are different from when I was a student. I would dare say they're different here at UNLV than Clemson students, than Wyoming students. And so it's critical to bridge that disconnect by really understanding the student community. And we do that primarily through our student employees. They are a great resource, and ways that we can use our student employees to help with the work of the libraries helps us to understand how we're serving our students better. Student groups, student activities, anything that we can do to engage with the community to understand the environment and the expectations that our students have, and then we can bridge that gap more effectively.
Thank you.
So I think, Maggie just talked about the disconnect between the library and the community. So I'm not going to, and I would agree with everything that you just said. We're facing the same issues around diversity of our staff and the ways in which we connect and contribute to our the success of our campus and broader community. So I'm going to talk about one of the things that you mentioned, Ray, was sort of within the library, that sort of disconnect between librarians and staff. That was something that was pretty noticeable here at the University of Delaware when I arrived, and so we have been actively trying to address and minimize that gap, right? For our users, for the folks who walk into the library, everybody who works in the library is a librarian. Yet within the library, we often, and this is not true only here, or was not true only here at UD, I've seen this in other places as well, we sometimes spend so much time making that distinction between the professional or non-professional or paraprofessional or, librarian or support staff, whatever names whatever labels we choose to put on these seemingly different staff in our organizations. We spend a lot of time sort of protecting this divide. I don't believe in that. Right. And I think that we're all here for a singular purpose, to contribute to the success of our community, our students, our faculty, other staff members across the library and across the campus and within the library and the broader community. So we've been, doing a lot to try to minimize that perceived difference. So getting at UD, on our campus, we use the language exempt and non-exempt staff. Exempt staff are the quote professional staff, and the non-exempt are the paraprofessional quote staff. So we've been doing a lot to get all the staff a lot more engaged in, simple things like committee work, right? So whether it's a search committee or we're doing a new project, making sure that all of these projects are inclusive in many ways. And this also addresses the diversity issue that Maggie spoke about as well. And I spoke in the last question about taking the time to meet all of the staff members in the library, and I think that has also been another thing that another effort that has gone a long way in helping everyone to perhaps feel a little more involved, a little more engaged in the library and what we do. I said we're all here for a singular purpose, and if we don't all believe that, if we don't believe that we're all valued, if we don't believe that we're all respected, if we don't believe that we're all contributing to the mission, the goals of the library, of the university, then I think we have failed. And so I'm trying to do everything I can to minimize those gaps.
Oh, sorry, Del, I think you're on mute. Yeah.
Well stated, Maggie and Trevor. I guess I'll finish up. I both agree with everything you stated. And Trevor, I do agree that one-on-one with staff and the librarians, library faculty here was really eye-opening for me. And I spent, I think, almost my first 2 months doing just that, having one-on-one meetings with library staff, and it was quite revealing. I think for me, this is an ongoing challenge, and it will continue to be. I believe the service models will need to change as the student populations we serve continue to change. So I've been thinking a lot about shifting the thinking in the library away from focusing on students being college ready, and we've kind of lived that, to libraries and staff being student ready. It's really a new way of thinking about how institutions are serving students and thinking about student success. So as the library prepared for the changes in K through 12 and how students are coming to our institutions. And we've all talked about, Trevor, you just touched on it, the demographic shift in our students entering college, how that's impacting the structure, services, and resources at our institutions. So as the library dean, I've been doing a great deal of internal work with staff and faculty, starting with looking at our own biases and assumptions, both with staffing and how we're working together, and how that impacts how we're serving students, and certainly underserved students coming to Fresno State, so that we can better promote the library as a really engaged, high-impact workspace, and also space for learning, and making it more student-centered and creating more student-centered practices. So, for example, most recently, we housed in the library building. We have ongoing partnerships with the Learning Center and our Center for Students with Disabilities. They reserve a lot of rooms and such, but we had a conversation recently with them, and it was really eye-opening, just the growing need for more library space for staff training, student testing, students who are on the spectrum, and of course meeting spaces for their staff, and that will only continue to increase, and of course that's going to impact our service model. Just the last 2 years, that mushroom growth has really been eye-opening for us. So I've been thinking about targeted professional development for library staff, starting with our hiring practices, training for anyone in a supervisory lead role, how they're thinking about their management style, how they work in teams, and really sharing that message when we work together. I think that
Sounds good. Thank you for answering that question. That is actually one of the challenging parts in navigating between different groups and perspectives, and reinforcing and reminding our value in supporting and enabling these processes. So now we are going into our final question. This one is really straightforward. Predictions. Give a prediction of a trend in academic libraries and or higher education in the coming years. I will start off with Trevor and then Del.
If only I had that crystal ball. So this was actually I don't know if well, this isn't a prediction of something that isn't already happening, right? So I guess it's not really a prediction. I think we're going to continue. We're going to see continued scrutiny for accountability for the work that we do here in libraries. So I think that certainly means we have to continue to find ways to demonstrate the value that we add to the academic mission, right? In this world of everything is online, or, books are dying, or libraries are dying, or the library profession is dying, we read these stories all the time. And sometimes, I think by even having those conversations within the library profession, we're giving more credence to those people who are making those statements than is probably worth. So, continuing to demonstrate the value that we bring, obviously, to the academic enterprise for those of us in academic libraries. We're going to continue to see as the ways in which our faculty and students continue to conduct their research. I was chatting with one of the librarians here yesterday who was meeting with a civil engineer, faculty in our civil engineering department, who was working on molecular organisms in concrete. And so is doing a lot of work with biochemists and chemists and biologists. And so you wouldn't really think of a civil engineering faculty member talking about, waterborne organisms in concrete necessarily. I don't know if I would have. But the interdisciplinary nature of research and scholarship continues to change and evolve, and so I think those sort of traditional boundaries that we have set around ourselves, or even within higher ed, oh, I'm in this department, or I'm the librarian for this, I'm the librarian for that. We will continue to move further away from this, the cylinders of excellence, as Lorcan Dempsey calls them. Other people say silos, because we need to have our tentacles or our arms, let's say, in a lot more places than they have traditionally been.
My apologies. I muted myself, so I was just wrapping up. I had a book recommendation that I found was really just eye-opening and just groundbreaking for me, thinking about the third question, Becoming a Student-Ready College, and it's edited by Tina Brown McNair, and it's, again, speaking to shifting the thinking in higher education from focusing on being a college-ready institution and being a student-ready institution. And so those are some of the themes that I was presenting. But as far as my predictions, I have two. I think as budgets of academic libraries and campus technologies will continue to be greatly impacted by technologies, I think the strategic priority will begin to be around digital literacy. And our president here at Fresno State is really focused on digital literacy. I believe it is the new literacy. I'm in full agreement with him. I think with a digital native student population in colleges and universities now, we'll continue to focus on traditional elements of educating students, but we're also preparing them for opportunities basically in a knowledge society that's very different, that's just will continue to evolve. So library resources and services will continue to skew towards technology services and digital technologies, but our services will need to be more strategically aligned with university-wide digital literacy initiatives. My second prediction, and I'm happy to be a part of it on the ground for here at Fresno State, is greater community engagement and partnerships in higher education. As more students are entering colleges and universities, they're coming from underserved communities, they're more brown, and they're needing services and resources, and that's going to impact the library. We're starting to work backwards with local K-12s, as I mentioned before, to get more involved on the ground floor and engage with students when they're even in grade school and middle school, to get involved with programs and initiatives, I think, to prepare students to even qualify to apply to colleges and universities. So academic libraries and librarians will have a significant opportunity to embed themselves in very different, creative, innovative ways. I think with the model I'm glad to be a part of, 21 of California State universities, 23 campuses are defined as Hispanic-serving institutions. And as many of you may know, CSU is the largest four-year public university system. So as we move forward with that trend, I think we will be setting a tone.
So this is Maggie, and I want to thank Del and Trevor for their observations because my microphone was muted, but I was cheering, going, yes, exactly. So not to repeat what they have predicted, I'll add another. This is more of an observation than a prediction, and I hope that this does not come true. So I have been very concerned about the perception of higher ed within our society. So we have seen the reports this past fall that confidence in higher education, the cost of higher education and student debt are causing skepticism and the accountability that Trevor has been talking about in his comments. So the trust level, the need, the support for higher education has plummeted in recent years. We're also seeing a similar skepticism towards science and research. And so while libraries tend to have a trusted reputation within society, as evidenced by a Pew study last year. My concern is that if we're not careful, we could fall into that same free fall of public perception of libraries. And indeed, we see it often when individuals say, you still have a library? What? Students still read books? What do you do in there? So the traditional library is long gone on all of our college campuses, but there are perceptions that will drive funding and support for academic libraries as well as for our institutions. So my prediction, I hope, does not come true, but I think as a profession, we need to be attuned to what is happening to higher education and research perceptions around us and make sure, as Del noted, that we're connected to the community, that we are accountable for the investments and the resources that we are entrusted with, and that we are strong advocates. We market, and frankly, we need to brag about the work that we do. We need to talk about the impact of our collections, of our library instruction, or research support, and link those directly to accountable metrics for the university. And we need to be more forthwith in stating how we are achieving those goals. So I think if we're paying attention to our relationships, our role on campus, and how we're serving our students and faculty, I hope that my prediction or that my observation does not come true, and that we can avoid some of the perceptions that higher education and research are now struggling with.
Thank you, Maggie, Trevor, and Del for sharing your insights. We are going to jump into Q&A. There are actually 3 questions right now, and with the attendees, if you have questions, feel free to type them. I will start off with Kimberly Keaton. If this one's to Trevor, if you want to elaborate, how would you do this from a solo librarian position in a museum that houses an art library? The difference would be servicing the staff and the public. And I know you mentioned, you responded a little bit, but if you wanted to elaborate, please feel free.
Yeah, so I think, you know, a lot of what Maggie was just saying is quite relevant. Even though it's a solo librarian position, then, you know, it's a library within, but, you know, we're all libraries within a broader institution, right? Here, in this instance, I guess it's just a matter of scale. It's a library with a staff of 1 in a broader institution. The institution, you know, I don't know how many staff are in the museum within which the library is situated. So, you know, how does the library or the librarian then show that value, show those connections that, you know, we're not just a place where people come to get books. It's what is it that we're contributing to the museum and the mission of the museum. You know, making those tangible sort of value, finding those tangible value-added statements to demonstrate, or finding those tangible value-added elements to demonstrate the role of the library. And then, you know, it's also a little bit about the culture. So what has traditionally been the relationship between the staff in the museums and the solo librarian? So does the librarian then have that opportunity to, you know, what is that working relationship like? How are they interacting with each other? So, you know, it's perhaps a little high level, my response, because I don't know enough about the sort of organization and the culture, but just a couple of things that I would recommend. I don't know if Del or Maggie have anything to add to that.
If not, I will jump into another question. This one is an open question from Lori. If there's time for open questions from attendees, I'd be interested to learn what motivated each of the presenters to pursue this advanced leadership position. Del or Maggie, if you'd like to start off first.
I'll start. I think the shift came from me. I started my career focused kind of technical background, technical services basically, and given the opportunity by a really mentoring supervisor, I'll say, to lead a couple projects. And I just became interested in learning more as a supervisor and as a manager. Working at the Baker Library at the Harvard Business School, I was awash in sort of the MBA world, but I really kind of took to organizational development. And I've always been interested in how that applies to libraries, because I know we don't like to think of libraries as businesses, but of course they are on some level, on many levels actually. So I've always been interested in that and seeking more opportunities to lead in what management and leadership means in libraries. So it's just been an interest of mine and definitely a career track at this point.
This is Maggie, and my pathway has been similar. I came out of public services. I fell into management almost by accident. I had only been a librarian working at Arizona State University for about 6 months, and my department head was moved into an associate dean role. And so, boom, I became an interim department head. And 2 years later, when the associate dean moved back to being a department head, I thought I really, really like this. Similar to Del, I like the management and organizational aspects of it, and went on to get my master's in public administration because I enjoy it so much. But ultimately, I think it is about impact. I felt as though I could have a greater impact in leading the organization and also bringing forth the ideas and the expertise that I thought that I would contribute to an organization. But I also believe one of my strengths is the ability to encourage collaboration, to build teamwork, to bring individuals together, to facilitate. And doing that for the organizational level, to me, was very, very appealing. So that is why I made a decision, probably about 15, 16 years ago, to move from an associate dean position, which I loved, into the dean role. And it's been a good move for me personally. And although it's challenging, it is a career path that I recommend for other librarians.
Trevor, do you have anything you want to add?
I remember quite vividly having a conversation about 12 years ago with one of my mentors, and who kept telling me, you should be a library director, and I kept saying, no, I don't want to be a library director. And we talked about why, and actually it's more than 12 years ago, but I was looking at the way in which, and this person was the director at the time, who spent a lot of time sort of out of the library, and I just didn't really have an understanding at that time of sort of exactly what that role was. And so as he said to me at the time, when I explained why I didn't want to do that, he said, Trevor, that's a negative decision. It's not really thinking about, what Maggie just said, the impact that you can have. We talked earlier also about being able to set the tone, set the expectations, and really sort of lead the library in ways that are contributing to student faculty success. So, when I got this job, and this mentor was a reference, and still a very good friend of mine now, So I called him up to say I got the offer, and he said, "Remember that conversation we had all those years ago?" But it is sometimes challenging, but I absolutely love getting up and coming to work every day. I work with a really great team, the staff here, and I feel really fortunate to be in this role where I have this sort of influence to be able to make the impact that we want to make here at the university. And like Del and Maggie, I certainly would recommend this path for those who believe that it is something for them.
Thank you. We have another question here. What tips do you have for unifying staff on the organization's goal? What do you recommend for changing long-standing mindsets during change management?
So let me take I'll start this off, and I'm sure Del and Maggie have something to add. So one of the things that I did here at the University of Delaware was to, we started a new strategic, it happens a lot, new guy comes in or new person comes in, they want to have a new strategic plan. In this case, it was sort of needed. We also had a new president at the time that I came in. The president started a month before I did. And so the university was really thinking about its direction. And so it made sense for the library to think about its direction that is in alignment with the direction that the university was heading. So we started a strategic planning process. And this was a process that I was not involved in at all. Right. It was a completely staff-led process. We hired a consultant, Adieta Jones, who many of you probably know. He came in and helped us with that process. But I talked about inclusivity. Was a very inclusive, exempt and non-exempt staff members on this, and they spent months together, about three months together, working on meeting with all staff and meeting with our constituents, alumni, all of the things that one needs to do. But that really helped build that ownership of the plan, because it was not something that I said we need a plan, but it wasn't Trevor's plan, or it didn't have sort of Trevor's stamp on it, right? It was how the staff believed that we should be moving forward in alignment with in the service of the university's goals. We subsequently created a strategic initiatives committee. So all staff members have the opportunity to submit ideas for programs, services, initiatives that are in alignment with the plan. And then those plans, those ideas become the committees. So it takes away that personalization. So those who felt that they didn't have a voice before, here they have an opportunity to submit an idea, whereas, hey, nobody will listen to me because they don't like me because blah. Those things are now, the plan is for those things to dissipate. Because everyone has the opportunity to submit the ideas become the committees, and then they move forward, through this process that we've developed. So just one of the ways that I think this can happen.
Thank you, Trevor. Del or Maggie, do you have any thoughts, or we can move on to the next question?
And this is Maggie. I would just add, and one thing that you've probably have noticed as we've all been talking about this is that we're learning from each other. So as a leader, it's a constant learning. We don't have the answers. So I'm jotting down some notes from Del and Trevor to adopt for UNLV. So this is fun morning to me. Thank you. One thing that I would say is that finding champions within an organization for culture change does help. That it's not up to just the leader, the library dean or director, to change the culture. I think getting back to what Trevor mentioned about committees and buy-ins and And I would add to that, working with the leaders within the organization, both the formal and informal leaders within an organization helps to change the culture. And I talked earlier about setting forth expectations and a vision, and that has to be repeated constantly. So if you're changing a culture, setting forth that expectation, modeling it, and repeating it over and over, eventually the culture will change. And there might be, frankly, some unhappy individuals when there is a culture change. And that means that either those individuals adapt to the new culture, or they leave because they no longer like it, or unfortunately, you might need to make the decision for them, and they leave at your directive, so to speak. I don't think we talk enough about that, but the hard part of leadership is when there is a change, when there is a new direction, whether that's in culture or mission or programs, sometimes people don't agree with that, and sometimes additional changes need to be made either by the individual or by the leadership. So, but hopefully, if people are on board, they understand the changes that are going on.
And I'll just add, I completely agree with you, Maggie, and Trev also touched on this. I think change management is at the core of this. We touched on some of these themes, but really for me, ensuring that staff are completely, just, I guess if you're thinking of being a cog in a wheel, or just really understanding where they fit in the larger strategic priorities of the institution. It's important that they understand how their individual contributions and responsibilities and tasks impact our services and student success. We all play a role, and it's important that people understand that their work is important and it meets a larger vision, if you will. I also think making those, ensuring that those in lead supervisory roles are really accountable, ensuring that the teams are working in a particular way and have a particular look and feel. And I've really talked a lot about that in my role here at Fresno State. It really kind of helped forcing people to kind of shift that thinking and working together in very different ways. We all work differently. Some people are more visual and others prefer to read a lot of things. I don't know. But it's just making sure that they're accountable. And I think one strategy is making sure that the training is there, the professional development, the cultural biases, the micro inequities, microaggressions, unconscious biases, that people in any kind of role where you're working with other people and in a lead role, that's very clear, that we've all kind of leaned into that discomfort a little bit and looked at that. So I look closely at search committees. I look at closely at committee structures, at people who haven't been asked to do things and why they haven't been asked. Many people have just kind of disengaged for many years for the very reasons that you've kind of spoken to, Maggie. So I pay attention to that, and if I have to insert myself in, then I will. I think that's sort of forcing that change, and it isn't comfortable for a lot of people.
Thank you all. We are actually going to be wrapping up. There are several questions still coming in. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. I wanted to thank Trevor, Dell, and Maggie for giving their hour to really share their experiences and their advice. And thank you all for coming. And if you have questions, please feel free to reach out to them. They are very receptive. And there is a reason why I was able to get them to speak. And I'm really happy that they agreed to do so. So to wrap up, I just wanted to mention that there are actually a few exciting things coming in. March webinar will be another conversation with 3 other library leaders from community college, special library, and a research library. In April, I actually got this confirmation just now during the webinar, very excited. The UC Irvine Chancellor, Gilman, and the UC Berkeley Law Dean, Tremensky, and Dr. Joan Del Fattore will be speaking about academic freedom of speech and expression on campuses today. And it's going to be here. We'll send it out. Hopefully you'll get that invitation and that message. And at ALA Annual, we'll be doing a program with Dr. Eric Mitchell from UC Berkeley Libraries and Dr. Philip Skur from Stanford Libraries on leading organizations through linked data. I'll try to work with the webinars and see if we can get that online, and that's co-promoted with Alex. Again, thank you all for your questions, your time, and please feel free to reach out, and have a great Friday. Happy TGIF.
Okay, thanks everyone. Have a great day.